Okay, welcome everybody. We're going to give it another minute or two for more people to join up, and we'll start our program. Okay, welcome everybody. My name's Laura Farrell. I'm the newish outreach coordinator at Vermont Coverts. I joined the end of March, so I'm still getting my feet under me. This is the first program that I'm hosting, but I'm happy to say it's with someone that I met over a decade ago when he was he was finishing up his graduate research at UVM, trying to figure out best management strategies, I think, for grassland birds, such as the bobolink, which we have in our especially agricultural areas in Vermont. And I think Noah's been at this project for, did you say 20 years? So he's got a lot to share. He's been able to follow individual families and how things have tracked out for them over time. And I don't know how things have fallen out for the last 10 years, so I'm going to let Noah tell his story. Thank you for joining us, Noah, and from Maine.
All right, well, thanks for inviting me. I appreciate it. All right, everybody, good afternoon. How are you? Let me share my screen here and we'll get going. All right, does that look good?
Yeah.
All right, great. So thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it. Nothing I like better than talking about grassland birds, and particularly to Vermonters. I've been working with grassland birds in the Champlain Valley since 2002. And a lot has come from it. I'm now a professor in the School of Marine and Environmental Programs at the University of New England. This work originally started as my PhD research and continued as a postdoc. And then I came to University of New England in 2009 and have been here since, continuing it. And I want to start this talk with this picture of cows, and for a couple reasons. The first reason is that the birds that I'm going to talk about today wouldn't be in Vermont, and certainly not in the abundance that they're currently in, without these animals right here, without cows. They are really the drivers of the landscape. And importantly, when I started this work, there were around 1,240 dairy farms in the state of Vermont. And now I think there's around 770-ish. So there's been some plus or minus a few. So there's been a huge change in cows and how cows are farmed in the state in what I think is a fairly short period of time. But these cows are really critical to the landscape. And importantly, when you're looking at this picture, you're seeing cows, but you're actually also seeing grassland birds, bobolinks and Savannah Sparrows. They're in this picture, literally, they're just hidden. They're directly on the ground, sitting on nests. And so these nests are physically on the soil, on top of the soil, but they're hidden. They're hidden from the cows, they're hidden from us, and they have quite a secret life. And I'm going to tell you about that life today. Here is a picture of the landscape there. This is from Addison County, something that the kind of image that this is looking west towards the Adirondacks, a picture or a view that you all are all highly familiar with. Really beautiful. From a conservation standpoint, beautiful but challenging in that in this one picture, just thinking about the grassland habitats, there could easily be 10, 12, or 15 different landowners. And all of those landowners have different management objectives and different management styles. And this really impacts our ability to work across the landscape in that landowners own relatively small parcels. And so you have to work with them individually and try to come up with things that work for their needs. And that's been really challenging. And over the life of this project, we've now worked with, I think, just over 600 different landowners in the Champlain Valley. And our work is on some levels very simple. It's bare bones field biology, where we go out into a series of fields and we try to capture every breeding bird that's nesting in that field. And we do this for bobolinks and Savannah sparrows, those are the two most abundant grassland birds that nest in the Champlain Valley. There's a few other species around, but their numbers are quite small, including the eastern meadowlark. And in the bottom of this slide, you see a bobolink we caught in what's called a mist net. This is how we catch them in these long nets that are about 12 meters long and 3 meters tall. The birds fly into them, and then we take them out and put bands on their legs. So each bird receives a total of 4 bands on their legs, 3 color bands and 1 metal band. Excuse me. The metal band has a number on it, and then the color bands have a unique organization, and that every bird has a different pattern of colors so that we never have to capture them again. We can look at them with binoculars and know who that bird is as an individual. So this bird is orange, I think that's orange, green, blue, metal, and no other male bobolink has that combination. And so after we catch them, we band them, we measure them, we take blood, and many of them get tracking devices, and I'll show you more about that a little bit later, and let them go. And our job is to follow them for as long as they live and try to understand everything that we can about them. And that really starts with finding their nests. So in this image on the top right, you see this is a picture of a bobolink nest. Again, it's directly on the ground. This is actually on a field that had just been mowed, so there's not much vegetation right around it. Bobolinks lay about 5 eggs in a given nest. They can lay up to 7, but they tend to lay about 5. Savannah sparrows lay 4. On the bottom right in our hand, that is a chick, a Savannah sparrow chick that had just hatched 1 day previously. And then on the bottom left, sitting on the scale, is a bobolink chick that is 6 days old. And that chick is being weighed, and we take a blood sample from it. And then we put a metal band only on its leg. And we don't put color bands on the chicks. And we've been doing this on a number of fields for a long period of time, and with a lot of birds that nest on them. And here you can see some of the data where we've banded over 10,000 birds in the Champlain Valley, and we've monitored getting close to about 4,000 nests. And these data really have given us a ton of information about so many different things about their lives. The first thing I want to talk about is Laura first asked me to really talk about management. And this project started to answer a management question and has evolved into a life history project. And the reason that is because we were able to answer the management component to this question fairly rapidly, and maybe the first 6 or 7 years. So most of these fields are mowed. And this is old data on the bottom here where 19 to 50% of the available habitat is mowed by late May or early June. And really these data have changed. This summer that just passed, about 80% of the available grassland habitat in the Champlain Valley was mowed by the end of May. The weather was very favorable for mowing. When a field is mowed by late May or early June, 100% of the nests fail. 80% of them are destroyed by the machinery, and about 20% of them survive the entire process, but are then eaten by scavengers. Those scavengers can include gulls, ravens, crows, or mammals that search the field, skunks, raccoons, fox, and small mammals like mice. Mice and voles are also pretty intense predators of nests. So this is pretty grim information. And fortunately, the story goes a lot deeper than this. Otherwise, this project would have ended after about a year or two, because the birds respond to this mowing. And our goal the whole time has been to try to think about how we can balance and provide good habitat for both birds and farmers. And I say that really importantly, I really want to stress that, in that prior to our work, the dogma for how to help grassland birds was very simple, and that was that farmers had to delay their hay harvest. They had to delay their harvest at least to July 15th or into August. And that is true, and that is certainly a good management, or perhaps even the best management for grassland birds. However, that is non-management for dairy farmers. Dairy farmers that are actively removing forage to be able to feed cows that are lactating would have no product to sell. Their cows would simply not produce much milk in today's market if they were being fed forage that was cut after July 15th. And so our goal from the outset has always been to try to find alternative management programs that work for people who have different management needs, whether you're a dairy farmer, a horse farmer, beef farmer, or you just want to keep your landscape open. We wanted to find options for everybody. And came up with a really great one for dairy farmers. And this really is a big change in how grassland bird management was perceived. And in this management plan, it's a little bit complicated, but to kind of put it into effect, all we're asking is for dairy farmers to actually cut as early as possible in the season as they can. And so what that means is, in the 1980s and 1990s, cutting early was Memorial Day. If you could cut then, you're doing great. In the 1960s, it was actually around July 1st. So things have changed dramatically. When I first started this project, it was Memorial Day. We want farmers to move it even way earlier than Memorial Day, as early as they possibly can. There were hay farmers cutting this year in the Champlain Valley on May 8th. This was a crazy. May 8th was an unbelievable early date. Previous I'd ever seen was May 11th, but more commonly May 15th. And so once they cut early, we ask that they delay the second harvest for 65 days. Typically, a farm is cut early, and then the second harvest happens between 35 and 40 days later. And so really we're asking for a change of about 20 or 25 days. Okay, so what this program does is we acknowledge that the first harvest is going to damage nests, destroy nests. However, it's early enough where the birds have put in less effort into those nests. And so they still have energy to re-nest. Some of the birds haven't even started nesting at all. And then that 65-day window is long enough for the grass to grow tall enough for the birds to come back to the field and to successfully nest. And when I say successfully nest, it's not only that the nestlings leave the nest, because they walk out of the nest and they cannot fly for about a week to 2 weeks. And so this gives them enough time to be able to grow and be able to provision for themselves and move out of the way if a tractor's coming. We've created a similar plan here also for grazing. The dates are a little bit different, but we have similar options as well. This plan has been funded by NRCS and in 3-year contracts. So it's really worked. And now let me show you about how the proof the proof of this project. Okay, so this is a figure showing babies. Really, it's kind of that simple, and the number of babies that an individual female can produce in a given summer. And you see that on the y-axis. On the far right, in red, are the number of babies that a Savannah sparrow female or a bobolink female can produce in a given summer on traditionally mowed fields. And so what that means is these are fields that are mowed, let's say Memorial Day, and then again in 35 or 40 days later. And there you see that Savannah sparrows can fledge just over 1 offspring per female, and bobolinks produce 0 offspring per female. Savannah sparrows are able to produce 1 offspring because they keep trying. We've had females on those fields nest up to 6 times. And so to give you an idea of the energetic consequences of this, when you nest 6 times and you lay 4 eggs in a given nest, each egg is 2 grams. So 6 times 4 is 24, times 2 grams is 48 grams worth of eggs. A female Savannah sparrow weighs 16 grams. So in about a 4 to 6 week period, she's laid 3 times her body weight in eggs. Very, very energetically costing situation. Now let's go to the far left bars. Those ones in the yellow are these birds' nesting success on the fields that I just described to you, where farmers are mowing really early in the season and then delaying 65 days. So that change doubles reproductive success for Savannah sparrows to about 2.5 offspring per year. And for bobolinks, it increases it from 0 offspring to 3% offspring per year, 3 offspring per year. A super dramatic change. The bars in the middle, the blue bars, are the number of babies they produce on fields that are never mowed at all. And you can see they are very similar. They're a little bit higher on fields that are not mowed, but they're not statistically different. That is a massive win-win situation where farmers are able to mow their fields early, get their harvest that they need, and they're able to also farm bobolinks and Savannah sparrows successfully. Huge win. Okay, so from there, I'm actually not going to talk much directly about management. I want to show you the effects of these management programs on these birds' lives. And in doing so, I need to show you like the stars of the show. The stars of the show, of course, are the birds, but it's also these folks here. These are largely the students that have worked with me, and they are out finding nests, banding birds, and bringing creative questions and energy to this project, asking what happens when they do this? And that has led to lots of different projects. And I want to show you some of these projects. So I'm going to tell you the stories of, I'm not even sure, remember, 3 or 4 different projects here, ranging in different topic areas. The first is divorce. I had a student, amazing student named Kylie DiMaggio, who's a Vermonter. She's from St. Albans. She worked on the project for 3 years. And after the first project, she wanted to talk about what happens to these birds with relative to divorce. And so what I mean by divorce is you have 2 birds that are nesting together. That nest is either successful or it's unsuccessful. After whatever happens to them, they have to make a choice of whether they want to re-nest together or nest with somebody else. And that would be considered divorce if they re-nest with somebody else. And you can think about this both for within a given season. So within one summer, they have 1 nest. Do they choose to nest with each other for the next summer? And you can think about it for the next year. So you've got these 2 birds, they nest together, they fly away to Argentina, they fly back, they look at each other. Are we going to choose to nest with again, or do you like somebody else? Go for there. So does that make sense to everybody? Okay. So let's now talk about the consequences of what's going on. Whew. Sorry, I'm not able to advance. Sorry, folks, something happened here. I'm not able to advance my slide. Aha. Okay. That's that advance, yeah? Okay. All right. So let's first talk about between year divorce. So what happens from year T to year T plus 1? So the first is these birds are quite likely to divorce. For bobolinks, 85% of them divorce, and they're even more likely to divorce if their nest in the previous year fails. For Savannah sparrows, almost 70% of they divorce between years. So that's a pretty clear trend that most birds, even if they survive to the next year, are going to choose not to go back to the same pair that they had the previous year. The story, however, within a given breeding season is completely different, where bobolinks always stay with the pair that they have previously. And Savannah sparrows are pretty similar too, where 83% of Savannah sparrows also repair with the same bird that they're with in the previous nest. So that's kind of an interesting trend, very different between years. And now let's talk about the actual consequences of this, all right? Because when you think about the consequences, these birds are looking for benefits. And what benefits means is they want to make more babies. That's it. It's a very similar situation. Can I make more babies? And let me show you the story of that relative to divorce. So let's just look at the Savannah sparrows on the left of your panel, okay? And you see two sets of bars. And then this is, again, the number of babies that a female can produce in a given year. You want to look at the difference, the change from the number fledged in the previous nest, that's their first nest, to the number that they fledged in their second nest. So with the gray bars that show 180 in it, you want to look at, is there a change between the first one to the second one? And then the 256, the same thing. Is there a change? And you can see here for Savannah sparrows, there's no change. The divorced is the gray bars, and you did not divorce in the dark bars. You can see that there's no change in reproductive success, whether they divorced or did not divorce. So that means for Savannah sparrows, there's absolutely no consequence to divorcing. It doesn't really matter to them in terms of producing babies. Now let's shift to the right with bobolinks. You compare the birds that divorced in the gray bars, the light gray bars, 92. And you can see that the number of offspring that they produced goes down in their second nest. Whereas with the dark gray bars, if they stayed together, it goes up. It goes up. So for bobolinks, there's a real clear adaptive benefit where they actually double their reproductive success if they choose not to divorce. I can't necessarily explain to you like why they make these choices, but I can talk, this is the effect of them, okay? This is the effect of them. So interesting stuff, right? These are things that I suspect none of you thought when you came to this talk today, you'd be learning about bird divorce, or even that birds do divorce. How does this apply to them? All right. So how about aging? There's a word that we all have to deal with, each and every one of us, is called senescence. And senescence is simply our ability to perform at any task as we age. Does that change with age? And I had another amazing student named Olivia Scott who was really interested in this. She wanted to know, do female birds reproduce more effectively? Are they better at making babies as they get older? And so we looked at this for both bobolinks and Savannah sparrows. On the bottom panel, you see age. Okay, so a 1-year-old bird is a bird that was born last year and is here nesting this year. And so a 4-year-old bird is in her 4th year of nesting. The metric on the y-axis is a little bit different. Instead of the number of babies produced in a year, it's a daily nest survival. And I can explain this, I think, fairly easily, in that the daily nest survival is simply the probability that a nest will not be eaten from today until tomorrow, over the next 24 hours. And so a 1 would mean that that nest absolutely survives. A 0 would be that that nest absolutely gets eaten between the next 24 hours, okay? So you're looking for higher numbers are good. And here, the trend for both species, for bobolinks and Savannah sparrows, is that as they get older, females become less proficient in nesting. They become less proficient in nesting. The effect of this is especially true and especially strong for Savannah sparrows, where you can see that female Savannah sparrows really struggle as they get older. This is largely effective of what I talked about earlier, in that Savannah sparrows produce so many more eggs across the season than bobolinks do, and that their bodies are just maintaining. So they're making a balance between their personal survival versus successfully producing young. All right, so the third project I want to talk about here is relative to climate change. And this is a student named Maeve McGowan who worked on this project. And this map that I'm showing you here is from a previous work that we published. Many of you hopefully know Roz Renfrew. Roz is a biologist with Maine Inland Fisheries and Wildlife. She's amazing, absolutely amazing. She worked for many years at the Vermont Center for Eco Studies, and we used to collaborate on bobolink work, looking at where bobolinks went when they weren't in Vermont. And I start with this when I'm talking about climate change, because you see here, this is a map of their migration in the fall and the spring. So in each of these black dots in the tops of the maps, we went to those sites and put tracking devices on bobolinks. And the colors that you see are the places that the birds went during their migration. And what we did in this project with Maeve is that we went to the key places that they stopped in. Okay, so those key places are in Venezuela, and then in Bolivia and Argentina. And we wanted to know, as the weather and climate is changing in these places, how are bobolinks responding to that? Or are they responding to it as they are experiencing different conditions? And here are the results. Oh man, I'm having the same delay here, sorry. Okay, here we go. So here's the results of this. Super fascinating. The first panel on the top is their behavior in Vermont, okay? So when you're thinking about climate change, you want to know if the animals are responding to changing conditions in South America. If they were responding, we would expect them to change when they nest, their arrival times, or some other behavior related to that. And in this top bar are the dates in which these birds, bobolinks in the heavy black line, Savannah sparrows, bobolinks in the gray line, Savannah sparrows in the black line, when they started nesting in Vermont. And you can see that over this 18-year period, there was variation across years about when they started nesting. However, if you drew a line across the trend, the long-term trend across all that time is that neither species changed when they started nesting between 2000 and 2020. So they're not adjusting their timing of nesting relative to the changing conditions in South America. Now, importantly, that's the birds. What about the habitats that they're using? The bottom figure shows the timing of hay harvest in the Champlain Valley when the first fields started getting cut. And here we see a dramatic change in that farmers over this period started cutting earlier and earlier. And so let me interpret that y-axis. So the Julian date, the number of days, is the number of days since the new year. So 160 would be 160 days since January 1st. So that's going later into the summer. 130 is 130 days since January 1st. So that's earlier in the spring. And you can see over this period, the trend is clearly going down, which means the farmers were cutting earlier. And in fact, in our brief study period, the average mowing date advanced by 10 days. Farmers were cutting their fields 10 days earlier in the Champlain Valley. That is a remarkably fast change, particularly because the birds did not change at all. The birds continued their nesting in the same period over that time. So I'm gonna, from this climate change study, I'm actually gonna move on from there because I think that's interesting enough. There are results about things that the birds experience in South America, like precipitation and so forth. The short story is that precipitation in Venezuela and precipitation in Vermont were the two things that most affected the timing of when they started nesting. Okay, so now I want to talk more about bird movements. And this has a lot of relevance because we're stewards of these animals, and what we do affects the choices that they make. I'm going to talk about 3 different types of tracking technologies. The first is a device called a nanotag. And nanotags are little backpacks that these birds wear with an antenna, and they give off beeps every 10 seconds or so. And there's towers all over the world. And this is an image of showing you where the locations of these towers are in North, Central, and South America. And if a bird flies within about 15 kilometers of one of these towers, the tower detects them, saves that data, and then puts it up online for us to know when the bird was there. All right. Pretty slick system, and gives you some good information. Naturally, there's holes in that data in that we don't know what habitats the birds were in, nor do we know about the spaces that we don't have towers in, right? Because this isn't 100%, our landscape is not 100% grid where, birds can move by and miss them. But nevertheless, the data is pretty cool. And this is what these tags look like. This is a male bobolink in the middle and a female bobolink on the right. We've deployed these tags for the last 3 summers and continue to deploy them. And here's where they go. I'm going to show you some different maps here of how these birds move. And this is all about fall migration. Okay, folks, this is when the birds leave their breeding grounds. And these are all birds that came from Shelburne Farms. And here you can see these 2 birds all came down the eastern seaboard, eventually made it to Florida. They got to Florida in mid or early September. And then from September, we didn't get any data for them in the Caribbean or South America. Importantly, you can see their stops are in the Delmarva Peninsula there, around the Delaware Bay. And that's going to be a theme of the data here. Here's 2 more birds. I'm sorry, 1 bird. Again, this bird followed a fairly similar path, going from Vermont down to the Delmarva area. Took a straight shot there. And then again, from Delmarva down to South Carolina, and then Georgia. And then from Georgia, probably took off over the ocean and flew directly. Here is another bird that flew from Vermont down to the Delmarva Peninsula. Last seen in Virginia on the Chesapeake Bay. Not detected in the southern US. Here's 2 more birds with a similar pattern. These are birds that were last seen in Maryland, in the Delmarva Peninsula. I keep saying the same words here, right? The same key parts. And yet again, here's 2 more birds where you're seeing they stop, they come south and end up at the Delaware Bay and are not seen again from there. And then I think this is the last one I'm going to show you for nanotags. A very cool one where the bird flew from Vermont down to Maryland on the Delaware River, and then took off over the ocean, likely, and was detected in Florida, possibly very briefly, in September, and then was actually detected in Venezuela a short time after. The time it was detected in Florida was the 15th of September, and then Venezuela, 23rd of September. So this bird likely stopped on Cuba for a bit of time before moving on to Venezuela. So very important data. And one of the things that really comes out from that is from a conservation standpoint, there's clearly one region that we really need to focus on for their fall migration, and that is the Delmarva Peninsula, looking for habitat, making sure that there's habitat for them to be able to stop over there where they're not disturbed and they're able to eat like crazy before they take big flights. Okay, so the next tracking technology I want to show you about is it's called a geolocator. And this is a very different type of device in that the birds wear them like backpacks. Here there's a female bobolink on the left, male bobolink in the middle, and then a Savannah sparrow on the right. And these devices do not communicate with anything outside. They store information. They collect light level data every 2 minutes constantly. And we have to recapture these birds a year or more later and remove the devices. And then once we've removed the devices, we can download the data and go through a fairly complicated modeling process with the data and know where these birds were over time. And we can get some really remarkable information from it. So here is a map of bobolinks. I published a paper maybe about 5 years ago where I was interested in ocean crossing behavior. And I wanted to know about, what are these routes that the bobolinks take to get to Venezuela? Do they stop over on islands, or do they fly directly from North America to South America? And this was 20 birds, fairly evenly split between males and females. The males are in the white and the females are in the red. And what you can see here is that almost all of the birds, took major ocean flights. Very few of them came down along the coast from Florida and then hopped to the islands and then kept hopping. They took major ocean flights. In fact, of the 20, 5 of them flew nonstop from North America to Venezuela or Colombia. Those flights took about 3 days, where these birds never landed at all. Absolutely incredible, right? I'm going to be exhausted walking downstairs to get a drink of water, let alone flying 3 days nonstop with no food or water. Okay, just absolutely. If they land in water, they're shark food. They will not survive. They can't get out of water. Most of the migration path is very similar to what I showed you earlier, in that the birds were coming off Delmarva Peninsula and going down to either Cuba or skipping over Cuba and going directly to Venezuela. Some birds, you can see this one crazy one that went out to Nova Scotia and flew down there to the islands. We've had a second bird since this. I created this figure that did the same migration path going out to Nova Scotia. So really remarkable data for these movements that we can see. And here is a map of where these birds went in South America. And so with these data, we can tell the precision of them is a little bit coarse, in that we know where the birds were kind of at the county or maybe the state level when they're wintering. And here you can see these birds went really far south. The blobs in South America show the kind of the regions that they're wintering in. Some went far into Argentina. Some stayed as far north as Bolivia. Really remarkable distance that these birds are flying. And I should say, bobolinks weigh the equivalent of 2 strawberries. They weigh 32 grams. And Savannah sparrows weigh the equivalent of 1 strawberry. They're only about 16 to 18 grams. So we've done similar work with Savannah sparrows. And I want to show you 1 year of data. In some respects, the Savannah sparrow data is even crazier than the bobolink data. This is where just 1 year of Savannah sparrows wintered. The red pins are, let me make sure I get this straight. The red pins are males and the yellow pins are females. These are all birds that nested within 1 or two fields that are all next to each other. So they're all very close with each other. And look at the distribution that they spread out for in the wintertime. We had a bird in Arkansas, two birds in Cuba, Florida, South Carolina, Georgia, and then way up on the border up in, was that Pennsylvania and New York? New York. Absolutely crazy. Massive distribution. You think about how much space these birds are covering across time. This was something that I was not expecting at all. I was expecting these birds all to winter in Georgia or South Carolina, but clearly they're doing something that I wasn't quite expecting. Okay, moving on. I know it's I'm getting a little tight on time here. I'm trying to advance the screen, which is not happening. Okay, so I want to talk about one last tracking technology, and this is one that is the next frontier. I have a unique permission to deploy satellite tags on male bobolinks. Satellite tags have been being deployed on birds for a number of years. However, they've been put on large birds like falcons or hawks or ducks, maybe some of the very large shorebirds. But they've not been put on songbirds because the tracking devices are simply too heavy. I've been very lucky to be able to work with an experimental one that is just small enough to put on a male bobolink. And the advantages of these tags compared to the other ones are dramatic in that they communicate real time with satellites. And so I can sit here on my couch and follow bobolinks as they're moving around the world without ever having to capture them. And not only can I follow them real time, the data that I receive for them is incredibly precise, where it can be as close as 200 meters of accuracy of exactly where that bird was. So compare 200 meters of accuracy compared to knowing what county or state a bird is in from a geolocator. It's dramatically different technology. Here is one migration path of a bobolink from 2 years ago that we put this on. This is a bird that went down and migrated down to the Delmarva Peninsula, and I'll show you that in a minute, and then flew directly from there to Cuba, spent time in Cuba a couple days, and then from Cuba, it flew directly to Colombia and landed in a big wetland complex. And 2 days after it landed in Colombia, the tag unfortunately stopped transmitting, I think from a software glitch. So absolutely remarkable technology. And let me show you what we can see from this. This is the bird in Maryland at its stopover site, right on the shores of the Delmarva, of the Delaware Bay. The blue lines that you see, the hatching there, that's the outline of the Blackwater National Wildlife Refuge. So a really well-protected complex owned by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And each of the dots that you're seeing are positions of this bird over about a 2-week period while it was fattening up and eating and eating and eating and eating and eating, okay? And what's important from this is that we can see exactly what habitats this bird was picking in order to prepare for that massive flight to Cuba. And of all of these positions, only about 10% of them were within the refuge boundary. From a management standpoint, this is incredibly valuable in that that gives information, say, okay, wow, we have birds coming here, but they might not be on our refuge. They might be in adjacent farms or adjacent tidal wetlands. So we as managers don't necessarily need to go and buy those lands, but we do need to go and see what are the habitats they're using and how are these farmers managing these habitats, and can we work with them to talk about how can we provide food for these birds on these crazy flights. Just incredible detail. Now, this is the bird in Cuba. And the bird flew there and spent a couple of days in Cuba. It was here for 2 days. This is in central Cuba. And this is the inset on the top right is it kind of blown up, and you can see that circular shape that's created from an irrigation system. This bird was, I worked with a Cuban ornithologist who remarkably actually from this community. And this bird was foraging in bean and corn and plantain fields, which is, again, something actually, a habitat that I would not have expected them to feed in. And importantly, from a conservation standpoint, this area in Cuba, post-pandemic, has had a massive increase in illegal trapping of songbirds, including bobolinks. This ornithologist that I spoke to had once recently seen up to 30 bobolinks illegally in a trap being sold. This pastime, even though it's not permitted, was originally for birdsong competitions, and more recently, post-pandemic, has turned into a food source for some Cuban folks. So it has real conservation value of this image, these data. So the last image I want to show you is from some work that I have in review right now. And this is for 4 birds that we've tracked with these satellite tags, 2 of which I've already shown you. And this shows you their migration trajectory. And what's really poignant about this is if you look at the green line that came down there, you see the green line stops in northern Cuba. And then there's a blue line that stops in the open ocean. Both of those birds migrated from the Delmarva Peninsula to Virginia. Then they left Virginia 1 day apart from each other. The bird in the blue line arrived first. The bird in the green line arrived the day Hurricane Ian hit Cuba. Literally at landfall is when that bird arrived, the green line. That bird then died in the hurricane. The blue bird had 1 day to move out of its way, and it did. It traveled immediately southeast. It fed for a few days, presumably found plenty of resources. It took off, and where you see the blue line ending is it flew directly into Hurricane Catherine as it was forming in the South Caribbean Sea. And that bird failed to be able to make land because it flew into the ocean. Now, this is a sad story, of course, but it's an amazing story in that we know what happened to these birds. We know the consequences of flying through the Caribbean during hurricane season and the choices that they make. With the previous tracking technology, I never would have known that information about what were the sources of mortality from these birds. And so it's truly the most exciting thing I could possibly be having going on right now in my lab. I love it. Okay, so I just want to end by thanking some of my really long-term collaborators, Alan Strong at the University of Vermont, who was one of my PhD co-advisors, 2 of my former graduate students, Jenna Kava and Emma White, Steve Travis, who I collaborate with on molecular work, Will Kuchitsky, who I work with GIS stuff, Raz Renfrew, who I mentioned earlier, and some of my funders have been incredibly generous, and many of the landowners as well, particularly around Shelburne Farms and Meech Cove, have been just wonderful, wonderful to me for this time. And the baby Savannah Sparrows, because they are so important. Without baby Savannah Sparrows and bobolinks, we wouldn't have these birds every day. So I realize it's 12:50. Apologize if I went a little long. I'll stop sharing there, and I'd be happy to try to answer any questions that you may have.
Wow, thank you. It's impressive how fast technology is getting more specialized, and it's really neat to see that your research is it's keeping up with that pace, and we're getting really into the details that we need right now to conserve this species. Let's see, we have a couple of questions. One is, how many farmers are taking part in the NRCS program to mow earlier and then 65 days later?
Yeah, I actually don't have the answer to that question. When the program first started, in the second or third year of it, there was about 1,200 acres enrolled in the program, and the number kind of has, I think, gone up and down. I think the number is actually, I think, fairly low right now, largely because of field agent time. Field agents working with landowners to be able to communicate these programs. But it's kind of gone up and down, but I don't know the exact number right now, in all honesty. The cool thing to me about that is, in many respects, is having been able to talk to folks. When you sign on with NRCS, it's a 3-year non-renewable contract. I've gone back and talked to many of the landowners that have participated in this. And what's so gratifying is that almost all of them, on some portion of their land, have continued the management style, even though they weren't being paid. They found it just worked for them.
Wow.
And to me, that's kind of where it's at, right? Where you can start in this program, they're paid to do it, it works for them, and they can benefit from it in other ways as well. So it's really great.
It's monumental. See, there's another question. I'm curious about grazing recommendations, specifically for folks with sheep on a daily rotational graze schedule.
Yeah, sheep would be really hard to manage this, because sheep shore the grass so short, so short. Shelburne Farms is grazing sheep in a really active schedule like that. And to be honest with you, I don't think grassland birds are able to use those fields very much, because they're so patchy. They use the fields so they'll keep the fields growing before the sheep get in there, and the birds will use it then. But then after the sheep use them, I don't see the birds go in there much to nest. They will feed in them, but not much to nest.
Okay, thanks. We have one more question about the shift in haying time. Wondering if the shift is due to climate change entirely, or somewhat to the uptick in round bale wrapping.
Oh, I don't think it's round bale wrapping at all, actually. I think it's entirely about more favorable conditions, allowing folks to hay earlier, and a greater agronomic science showing the benefits of feeding lactating animals higher protein forage. I think it's really entirely those two things, more so than the availability, really the wrapping technology. Because there's the early cutting is actually not only being wrapped, some of it's being turned into haylage as well. It just sort of depends on the farmer and how they're feeding their cows.
Okay, great. Let's see, there's one more question. The NRCS practice guidance has been that producers must take their first cut prior to May 31st, like you stated. What if folks can't get on their fields due to wetness? Can they just skip their first cut and then start haying after July 15th or so? Will they get similar results? Basically, is the first cut required in the context of the delayed mowing NRCS practice?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. I'm really glad you did. So NRCS has actually changed their plans now. They used to have a few different plans, and they were somewhat complicated. Now they have 2 plans. They have the early mowing plan that I talked about, and then they have a delayed mowing practice that starts July 15th. And the payment for the 2 used to be very different, where the early mowing practice was paid at a much higher rate than the delayed mowing. And now they're almost the same, if not the same. And so the last year, I remember payment was like $163 an acre, around there. And it changes every year based on the price of hay. But the point of it is, to your question, is yes, absolutely. If your field is wet and you can't get on till July 15th, that's great. And there's financial benefits that can be available to you to help support any costs associated with waiting to July 15th. And so that's definitely a great thing for the birds. But if you're an active farmer and you really need to mow early, there's alternative plans for you as well.
Okay,
I hope I answered your question. Sorry, I feel like I was doing a little bit of this.
Okay, if not, you can keep sending questions, but we have time for one more question, and the ones that we don't get to, we'll answer and send the questions around. We'll also be posting a link to this on our YouTube channel, so you can share this talk with other folks who might be interested or watch it again.
So I might have said that. Did I say that Roz is working in Maine? I apologize. Roz works for the Vermont Fish and Wildlife, not Maine Inland Fisheries and Wildlife. I apologize if I said that backwards.
No problem. That got caught in the chat box, I think. Let's see. The last question is: I was wondering the reason for the east-west movement of bird A on your 4 birds satellite track slide. It seemed like birds B and D moved fairly north and south without a lot of east-west travel.
Yeah, let me look at that real quick. I think I just want to make sure that I have the correct one.
The yellow line.
Yeah, so there's a couple birds here. Let me share my screen real quick. There's a couple birds that look like this, where you see this point. This one is that Illinois. That's a false detection.
Okay.
That's a false detection.
No, I was asking about a later slide where you had the 4 birds, the different colored lines, and the yellow line, which I think was bird A, in like New England, kind of does some east-west travel, and I was just curious why it did that one.
Is it?
You got that one.
This map? Oh yeah.
Yeah, you see that yellow wiggle there?
Yeah, these data include when the birds are breeding. And we have found an absolutely remarkable amount of movement while they're breeding. Common flights 10 miles away. While they have a nest feeding chicks, they could fly 10 miles away and come back. So what you're seeing there is some very strange regional movements. Those really big ones were probably done right after breeding ended. But they're wild. I've been blown away about how much bobolinks are moving. Male bobolinks.
All right. Well, I think we're going to respect everybody's time. We know it's probably lunchtime for many of us, and allow folks to get back to work. And the questions that we haven't been able to answer, we'll try to get the answers from Noah and send them around in a day or two. But I want to thank Noah for agreeing to share his research with us. And it's really gratifying to see that the pace of what we can find out is keeping up with what we really need to know to help these species on the ground.
Absolutely. Thanks for inviting me. I appreciate it. Nice seeing you.
Yeah, thanks. It's good to see you again.
All right.
Bye-bye, everyone.